Jack was a boy no older than 10, yet his life had already been marked by hardship. He had a small, frail frame, his once bright eyes dulled by the weight of days spent surviving on the streets of New York City. His brown hair, messy and matted, barely peeked out from under the tattered beanie he always wore, and his cheeks were smudged with dirt, making him look far older than his years. Jack had no home, no family, and no one to share his pain with. His world consisted of the busy sidewalks, towering buildings, and cold alleyways where he slept at night. Every day was a battle for Jack, scraping by, looking for scraps of food, and hoping that the next passer-by might spare a bit of change. But on this day, Christmas Eve, something felt different. Despite the cold, despite his hunger, there was a spark of hope in his heart. Jack wasn't completely alone. He had one small treasure that gave him comfort, a tiny Christmas ornament he'd made from tin and string. It was nothing much, just a small star. But to Jack, it was everything. He held it tightly in his hands, never letting it leave his side. The streets around him were full of people rushing to finish their last-minute shopping, their arms heavy with bags and gifts. The festive atmosphere of the city, with its twinkling lights and Christmas music, seemed to belong to another world, one Jack could only watch from a distance. He sat on the icy pavement near a busy corner, his back pressed against the rough brick wall of a building, watching as families laughed and children pointed excitedly at the decorations. Jack's stomach growled, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the people passing by. His heart swelled with a fragile hope, the same hope he clung to every Christmas. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe someone would stop. Maybe someone would notice him and offer more than just a passing glance. The snow began to fall lightly, dusting the city in white. Jack looked up at the flakes drifting down from the darkening sky, his small hand tightening around the little star ornament. He could feel the cold biting at his fingers and toes, but still, he held on to that glimmer of hope. It was Christmas Eve, after all, and if there was ever a time for miracles, this was it. As the night grows colder, the wind whips through the streets, chilling the few remaining shoppers braving the elements. Jack pulls his tattered jacket tighter, trying to ignore the biting cold that seeps through his thin clothes. Just as he's about to give up on the hope of anyone noticing him, the low rumble of an engine cuts through the festive music. A sleek black SUV pulls up to the curb near Jack's corner, its polished surface reflecting the bright holiday lights. The door swings open, and out steps none other than Donald Trump. Dressed in a sleek black coat with a bright red tie peeking out, Trump commands attention without uttering a word. The crowd immediately reacts. Some cheer excitedly, a few snap pictures, while others glare with disdain. Yet, regardless of their opinions, everyone's gaze is fixed on him. He is flanked by bodyguards and aides, all dressed sharply, their eyes scanning the surroundings to ensure his path is clear. Jack's breath catches in his throat as he realizes who's standing just a few feet away. His heart races. Donald Trump, the man everyone talks about, right here on this very street. Jack feels a surge of excitement and anxiety all at once. He doesn't have much, but he does have his small, handmade Christmas ornament. Maybe, just maybe, this is his chance to do something that matters, something that could make a difference. Clutching the little tin star in his hand, Jack stands up on shaky legs, determination battling the cold as he makes his way toward Trump. His heart pounds in his chest as he threads his way through the bustling crowd. People brush past him, some casting him curious glances, but most are too caught up in the spectacle of Trump's arrival to notice the small boy making his way forward. Finally, Jack reaches the towering figure of Donald Trump, his small frame looking even tinier in the shadow of the former president and his security team. Jack's hands tremble, both from the cold and the sheer gravity of the moment. He stands in front of Trump, his breath misting in the frigid air, and holds out the tiny ornament with both hands. "Mister, I made this for you," Jack says, his voice soft but filled with earnestness. "Merry Christmas." That's Trump's sharp eyes glance down at the boy, taking in his disheveled appearance. Then his gaze moves to the ornament in Jack's hands. It's a simple thing, small, rusty, and clearly handmade. The edges are rough, and the tin is old, but the star is shaped with care. For a moment there's a flicker of something in Trump's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, but it's gone as quickly as it came. Without a word, Trump shifts his eyes to one of his bodyguards, giving a slight nod, a silent command to move the boy along. The bodyguard steps forward, but Jack doesn't back away. He holds the ornament up higher, hoping, pleading, silently, that Trump will mean something. But Trump simply waves his hand dismissively, brushing Jack off as though he were a fly buzzing around his head. "Take it somewhere else, kid," Trump mutters under his breath, his voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. He turns away without another glance, his polished shoes crunching against the freshly fallen snow as he heads toward his waiting SUV, his bodyguards forming a protective wall around him. Jack stands there, frozen, not by the cold, but by the sting of rejection. The ornament still hangs from his outstretched hand, trembling slightly as his hope crumbles. He watches as Trump's entourage disappears into the warmth of the SUV, the door closing with a dull thud. The black vehicle pulls away, leaving Jack standing alone on the icy sidewalk, clutching the small star that no one wanted. The festive lights twinkle on, but for Jack, the warmth and joy of Christmas feel farther away than ever. Those nearby catch the brief, cold exchange between Jack and Donald Trump. Some gasp in disbelief, while others whisper among themselves, their voices mixing with the festive sounds of the city. A few people pull out their phones, eager to capture the moment on camera, the image of a powerful man brushing off a small, homeless child, stirring something uncomfortable in the crowd. Jack stands there, rooted to the spot, his outstretched hand slowly lowering. His heart, once filled with hope, now feels heavy with the weight of rejection. His face flushes, and tears threaten to spill from his eyes, but he blinks them away, not wanting to cry in front of so many people. The ornament, the one thing he thought might make a difference tonight, dangles from his fingers, almost forgotten in the swirl of emotions. It feels like more than just a dismissal. It feels personal, like the world had turned its back on him in one of the few moments he dared to reach out. But then something happens. From the crowd, a woman steps forward, her face reflecting the compassion she feels. She's middle-aged, dressed warmly in a stylish coat and scarf. Clearly someone who's not struggling herself, but there's a softness in her eyes, a deep empathy for the boy standing so alone in the freezing cold. She's been watching the scene unfold, and she can no longer stand by in silence. New experience, yet all present, glimpses the tear-stained face of his own girl Trumplet, passing around over the onlookers, 1 to 3 seconds. Her focus is solely on Trump and the small, heartbroken boy he had just dismissed, because her face is solely on Trump had just dismissed, so it won't bother anyone else. People turn to look at her, but she doesn't conceal her own feelings, her pain, her sorrow, her longing for the safety and comforts of a home. Trump, already halfway to his SUV, stops at the sound of her voice. He turns, his expression a mix of annoyance and indifference, clearly not used to being called out in public, especially like this. His bodyguards glance at him, unsure if they should step in, but Trump waves them off, standing still, waiting for the woman to say her piece. The woman looks directly at him, her eyes sharp but filled with compassion. "He's just a child," she says, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "It's Christmas. How could you turn him away like that?" Her words hang in the air for a moment, and the crowd grows quiet, sensing the tension in the exchange. Jack watches from the corner, his eyes wide with surprise, unsure of what to think. No one had ever stood up for him before, not like this. Trump's expression hardens, a flicker of irritation passing across his face. He doesn't like being challenged, especially in front of an audience. He narrows his eyes at the woman, clearly unamused by her attempt to shame him. "He's not my responsibility," Trump replies, his voice cool and dismissive. He gestures vaguely toward the crowd and the bustling city behind him. "I've got a place to be." The woman shakes her head, her frustration evident. "And what about him? Where does he have to go tonight? He's out here, alone, in the cold, while you're heading off to some fancy event. What would it cost you to show a little kindness?" Trump's jaw tightens, clearly ready to end the conversation. "Look, lady," he says, his tone sharp. "I'm not here to solve every problem in the world. The kid's not my problem." The woman's eyes flash with anger, but there's something deeper, too. Disappointment. She knows she can't force him to care, but she won't let his indifference go unchecked. "No," she replies, her voice steady but sad. "But the way you treat others says more about you than any speech or title ever could." The crowd murmurs again, some nodding in agreement. Phones continue to record the moment, capturing the tense exchange. Jack, still clutching the little star, watches in awe. For the first time in a long while, he feels seen, not just by the woman standing up for him, but by the crowd watching with silent support. Trump, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, turns away, heading toward his SUV without another word. His bodyguards close ranks around him, and soon the sleek vehicle pulls away into the night. But the moment lingers, and the woman, still standing there, looks down at Jack. She walks over to him, her eyes softening with kindness. Kneeling down to meet his gaze, she smiles gently and reaches out a hand. "Hey, sweetie," she says softly. "Are you okay?" Jack blinks up at her, his voice shaky but grateful. I made this for him," he whispers, holding up the small, handmade ornament. The woman looks at the star, and her heart breaks a little. She reaches out and takes it from his trembling hands, examining it for a moment before looking back at him. "It's beautiful," she says warmly, "and I think you should keep it. It's your star. It's special because you made it." Jack stares at her, unsure of what to say. He feels the sting of Trump's rejection still, but the warmth of her kindness starts to melt some of the pain away. She stands up and places a hand on his shoulder, her smile reassuring. "Come on," she says gently, "let's get you something warm to eat." As she leads Jack away from the cold street corner, the city lights twinkling above them, the crowd slowly disperses, the moment captured but the lesson lingering. Jack looks up at the woman, her kindness wrapping around him like a blanket, and for the first time that night, he feels the true spirit of Christmas. After that, Jack sleeps well the next time passes, and in the morning he feels the true spirit of Christmas. As Trump strides away, disappearing into the warm comfort of his luxury SUV, the woman bends down to meet Jack's tear-filled eyes. Her smile is warm and soft, a stark contrast to the cold indifference he'd just experienced. Gently, she reaches for the ornament Jack still holds outstretched. Taking it carefully from his small, trembling hands, she examines the tiny, handcrafted star made from tin and string. "Thank you, sweetheart," she says softly, her voice full of genuine appreciation. "This is beautiful." Her words, filled with warmth and kindness, begin to lift some of the heaviness from Jack's heart. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a few crumpled bills, pressing them into his small hand. The smile she offers is a gift all its own, radiating the compassion that Jack had been so desperately seeking. Jack nods slowly, murmuring a soft, "Thank you." He feels a slight glimmer of relief, a fleeting sense of worth. But the rejection from Trump, the cold dismissal from someone so powerful, still lingers like a shadow, casting a gloom over the joy that should have filled the holiday air. The festive lights sparkle overhead, but Jack's spirit remains dimmed. Hours later, as the city quiets under the blanket of night, the scene begins to ripple far beyond the street corner where Jack had stood. A bystander, who had captured the entire exchange on their phone, uploads the video to social media. Within minutes, it begins to spread. First a few likes, a few shares, and then the numbers start climbing. By morning, the video is viral. Across the country, people are outraged, their hearts breaking for the small boy who had offered a gift and received only cruelty in return. Headlines across news platforms scream the contrast between Trump's vast wealth and the simple kindness of a homeless child offering a Christmas gift. The video plays again and again on the news, across social media feeds, and in group chats. People from all walks of life share their disbelief and anger, unable to comprehend how someone so fortunate could dismiss a child in need on Christmas Eve. Public opinion shifts sharply against Trump. The backlash is swift and severe. As the story spreads, so does the desire to right the wrong. Thousands of people begin donating to homeless shelters and charities in Jack's name, wanting to channel their outrage into something positive. The boy who had nothing becomes the symbol of Christmas generosity, his small star shining brighter than anyone could have imagined. Donations flood in: clothes, money, food, and toys for homeless children, all inspired by the viral moment. People rally behind Jack, praising his innocence and the purity of his gesture. The ornament he had crafted from scraps becomes a powerful symbol of the Christmas spirit, reminding people everywhere that the smallest acts of kindness can carry the greatest weight. Meanwhile, in the halls of power, Trump's team feels the full brunt of the backlash. The pressure is worse than they anticipated. Angry calls flood into his office, emails pour in, and the press is relentless. Reporters hound his aides for a statement, desperate for an answer as to why he had treated Jack so callously. The narrative begins to shift, and Trump finds himself on the wrong side of the Christmas story. That night, long after the cameras have stopped flashing and the news cycle has begun to settle, Trump sits alone in the quiet of his home. His phone in hand, he scrolls through the hundreds of messages left on his social media. Most are harsh, full of anger and condemnation, but one comment stands out among the noise. "If a homeless child can give a gift, what's stopping you?" Trump pauses, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. His hand hovers over the screen as he reads the message again. Slowly, the boy's face comes back to him. The wide, hopeful eyes, the outstretched hand, the tiny ornament that was offered without hesitation. In the quiet of that moment, something stirs inside him. Regret. The noise of the world fades away, leaving only the memory of that brief encounter on the snowy street. Trump had walked away, brushing Jack off like he was nothing. But now, in the solitude of his home, he feels the weight of what he had done. The boy had given freely, without asking for anything in return, and yet Trump had turned him away, choosing pride over compassion. For a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, Trump feels a twinge of guilt. It's unfamiliar, unsettling, and it sits heavy in his chest. The boy's face, full of hurt and confusion, lingers in his mind. He knows he could have done something different. He could have taken the ornament, could have offered a word of kindness, could have done something, anything that would have meant the world to that child. But now, it's too late. The moment has passed, and the damage is done. Yet the feeling gnaws at him, that quiet voice in the back of his mind, reminding him that sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest impact. He could have been the one to make a difference that night. Instead, it was the boy who taught the world what true generosity looks like. And so, as Trump scrolls through the endless messages of anger and disappointment, One small boy's act of kindness continues to resonate far beyond the streets of New York City, reminding everyone that the true spirit of Christmas is found in the simplest, most unexpected places. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned cold and clear over New York City. The usual bustle had quieted, with most people gathered in their homes, surrounded by family and warmth. But for Donald Trump, this morning felt different. He wasn't surrounded by security guards or the usual entourage. There was no press conference or business meeting on his schedule, just a solitary task he had set for himself. Today he walked the streets alone, dressed in a long overcoat, his steps slow and measured. In his hand, he carried something small, a shiny, expensive gold ornament, the kind sold in luxury stores, crafted from the finest materials. But this morning, it felt heavy in his grip, its opulence a sharp contrast to the humble handmade star Jack had offered him the night before. Trump searched the streets, scanning the familiar corners near Rockefeller Center, where he had last seen Jack. The streets were quieter now, save for a few passers-by wrapped in scarves and coats. But as he walked further, he finally saw him, the small boy sitting in the same spot as before. Except this time, things were different. There was a small crowd gathered around Jack. People had noticed the viral video, and they had responded. Boxes of food sat beside him, blankets draped over his shoulders, and toys stacked in a small pile next to him. Jack sat there, overwhelmed by the sudden generosity, still clutching the tiny star ornament he had made, though now with a faint smile on his face. Trump hesitated as he approached, unsure of what to say or how to begin. He wasn't used to this, confronting his own missteps, let alone in front of others. Slowly, Trump knelt down in front of Jack. His usual commanding presence softened. He held out the gold ornament, its surface catching the light. I thought you might like this, Trump said, his voice low and uncertain. Jack blinked, looking up at him in surprise. For a moment, he didn't move, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding in front of him. He had expected nothing more from Trump after yesterday, but there was no anger in his eyes, only quiet understanding. The boy reached out and took the gold ornament, holding it carefully in his small hands. He stared at it for a long moment, before looking back up at Trent. And then, with a soft smile, Jack did something unexpected. He reached into his own coat pocket and pulled out the same rusty handmade ornament he had offered the day before. The tiny star crafted from tin and string. "It's okay," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can have this one." He held the star out to Trump once more, offering it with the same innocence and kindness as before. Trump stared at the small, rough ornament, his mind racing with thoughts that he couldn't quite grasp. But something clicked inside him. The star, with all its imperfections, suddenly felt more valuable than the polished gold in his hand. Trump reached out and took the star, his fingers wrapping around the cold, rusty metal. It wasn't worth much in terms of money, but the meaning behind it weighed more heavily than anything he'd carried in years. He looked back at Jack, his voice catching slightly as he nodded. "Thank you," he whispered, tucking the star into his coat pocket, feeling its weight close to his heart. But Trump wasn't done. Before standing up, he reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to Jack. "Take this, too," he said, his voice steady now. The envelope appeared plain, nothing extraordinary about it. Jack took it, confused, but when he opened it, his eyes widened. Inside was more than just a few dollars. It was enough money to change his life, enough to get him off the streets, to find a warm place to stay, to have food, and, most importantly, hope. But beyond the money, there was a simple note tucked inside. It was a card with a handwritten message from Trump, and though the boy couldn't read it just yet, the words held something far more valuable than money. It was a promise, not of wealth, or luxury, but of kindness. The kind that had been missing from Trump's heart for far too long. Jack looked up at Trump, his eyes wide and brimming with gratitude. Trump smiled faintly, though his eyes carried the weight of understanding. He rose to his feet slowly, glancing around at the few onlookers who had gathered, but choosing not to acknowledge them. This wasn't about public attention or making a statement. It was about something much deeper. As Trump turned to leave, he felt lighter. There was no rush, no need to hurry to his next event or appointment. For the first time in a long time, none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment he had just shared with Jack, the lesson he had learned about generosity, not the kind that came from wealth, but the kind that came from the heart. Walking away from the small crowd, Trump's thoughts were filled with the quiet realization that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness carry the greatest meaning. The gold ornament still hung in Jack's hands, shining in the morning light, but it was the rusty, handmade star in Trump's pocket that had changed everything. That Christmas, the spirit of the holiday was restored, not just for Jack, but for Trump as well. It wasn't about the gifts or the material things. It was about connection, about humanity, and about how even the most powerful people could learn from the smallest voices among us. And as the city continued to celebrate Christmas, Jack's heart, like Trump's, was filled with a warmth that no amount of wealth could buy. A simple gift, a moment of kindness, had changed everything.